This video continues from the previous. Okay, so Japanese architecture, and this is traditional Japanese architecture, and you can see because Japan and China are so close to each other, there are very strong similarities. One of the things I like best about the Japanese architecture is that they're always in a garden. And so, with the Japanese style, they believe that the man made things should be on a grid. So, that's why you see a lot of grid horizontality and verticality in their buildings. But then you also see these gorgeous gardens around them. And that's especially in Japan where they have these. I get to it. Yeah, they have these beautiful cherry blossoms. And this is a traditional street and homes. This is a traditional residence in Japan. They live very, very close together because of how overpopulated they are. They're very, very densely populated. It's kind of interesting because in recent years, more and more young people are remaining single, and they're not having children because they don't know where they're going to put their families, because there's that many people on the island of Japan now, and obviously it's controversial, but it's just a fact that they're very, very densely populated. So you're going to see similarities between Chinese and Japanese architecture because there was actually connection between the two. They have had a history of not getting along, and recent years I think they get along better, but there's still tension between them. Nonetheless, they do have their styles do look similar, especially with the roofs, right? You've got those very similar roofs. You also have symbolism. Okay, so castles count as residences, fortunately, because castles are cool to look at, especially some of these medieval ones. And this is, as I think we looked at this briefly, this is a medieval castle. That's the whole thing. There's its moat, and it's actually an entire area. And it's one of the oldest surviving structures in Japan. And you can see there are names for the different parts. And the ones that don't translate into English have been left in Japanese. And so while this is still medieval, it is still Japanese. So when you have something like that where it's multiple, it fits in multiple categories, I would just call it Japanese medieval or medieval Japanese. But I like to show this to students because I think it's just a really great example of this beautiful symbolism, right? So you see this is terracotta, and they stamped into the terracotta these beautiful designs. And those are lotus leaves, are very common to the area. So that's why we see them. And then you can see that in many cases, some of the more modern architecture completely abandons the original style and is much more, it looks like it's European. It looks like they just wheeled that out of Europe. And so it's that very European, minimalist, modern, metal, kind of deconstructed style. I thought this one was really interesting. That the house has a screen. This is the screen up close. It's fabric, metal fabric that surrounds the house. So it's like a house inside of a box, but it's not really a box because it doesn't have a lid on it. More like it's got its own fence that you can see through, but it's still screened. It's kind of meant to be privacy. And this one's very cool because it's got trees on the inside. They have trees growing inside the house. I hope that's as big as they get because I don't know what happens if they start growing too big. And one of the things you have to think about when you're growing, because these trees are on the second floor, is you really have to think about the structure. You also have to think about the potential for water leaking because you see this is open. It's going to rain in here. And so you have to treat this like a separate enclosed space, almost like this is a porch. It's just your patio. So modern Japanese architecture looks more European than it does Japanese. Um, and so it very much has that European influence. Okay. And Thailand, and because we're still, that's why, this is named the Pacific East, because these countries are all located, near the Pacific or on the Pacific. And they all share kind of commonalities. There's a very common influence. And in Thailand, you're going to see two different styles, and you see them juxtaposed here: the traditional Thai style and classical style that the Europeans brought over. So you have those two in their older buildings. And then when you get to modern Thai architecture, it's got that global modern style to it as well. And so the Grand Palace, and there it is. It's got a wall around it. And it was this complex of buildings, and it is where their king lived. And so there is some Italian Renaissance. So basically, what they did when they built this is they built this in an Italian Renaissance style, which is very classical. You see and then they put the stupas on top, Stupa. They put the Thai flavor on top of and it's a matter of preference of whether or not you like it. But it's a combination of two styles. I mean, they did combine it well. They followed the style guides, and I don't know. I mean, I guess it would have helped if there was some more incorporation. They feel very disparate to me. Like these are just things stuck on top. That if they had started to blend it a little bit more, it might have been more successful. And then this is just the traditional Thai buildings and stupas and figurines. A lot of gold. And this is real gold. A lot of mosaics. We'll zoom in closer here. You can start to see the ornate mosaics. Very, very much detailed. So it's like glass tile embedded in or metal tile embedded in I'm trying to think, is that cloisonne? It looks like cloisonne. And this looks like it's concrete. It's hard to know without seeing it in person, but. And obviously all of this is gilded, and it's got these little glass pieces. The shiny little ones are little glass pieces. All this is glass. That may be glass too. It's probably glass. And just very unique, original, interesting. And that's what happens, when you allow, or not allow, but when people work in isolation from each other, and say everybody in all these different countries are creating their own wheels. They all come up with different styles and different ideas. And then you can see the glass embedded in the. This is an example of fish scaling that we have talked about previously. And that looks like it's done with the abalone shells, because right on, this is not ocean. They take the shells and they flatten out a piece of it and cut it and color it and use this in the design of the building. And this is a little miniature Angkor Wat, which is actually in Cambodia. But the religions are connected. And then this is how the average person lives, not the wealthy, which is not a bad way to live. And my guess is that's for the mother-in-law, maybe. And then platforms, but you see the very tall, steep roofs. They have the the triangular shape roofs on them, just like most of the And those are all functional, right? Because it gets a lot of rain. They get serious monsoons. And so you have to have these steep pitch roofs so that the rain runs off very quickly. If you have a flatter roof, the rain hits, it may not rain off very quickly, and it's going to create an extra load on your roof, and it could cause your roof to collapse. So these very pointed roofs are because of monsoon season. I mean, we have no idea what rain is compared to their monsoon season. And so that's why they have these very steep pitched roofs. Okay, here's some cool modern Thai architecture. You can see they sort of embrace the European minimalism for some of their modern homes, but they didn't completely disconnect from their culture. That feels that feels like it's in the general vicinity. I mean, I don't know that I would know that it was Thailand, but I would definitely know that it was Pan Pacific. Oh, this is beautiful. And this one's pretty interesting. I love these buildings on water, but you can see how this still ties into this. They're not completely disconnected. There's still a connection there. But overall, you're going to see that, everywhere we go, if you look at the original architecture from, the earlier periods, and then you look at the stuff that's being built now, you're going to either see a complete disconnect in some cases, or you're going to see that they maintain some of the style. But current architectural style has become much more globalized and much more common, and there's sort of this overall architectural universal style now. And whether or not that's a good thing or a bad thing is not for me to judge. Not judging it, just pointing it out. And you are free to evaluate that, criticize that, and think about that. And you should have opinions about things. I'm not going to share my opinions with you guys on everything because I don't want to influence you. um, Sometimes I have opinions about things and I share them just so you know that people have opinions about things. But for the most part, this is just really a very enjoyable thing to look at the different styles of architecture, to look at the history, to visit these other places and see how they solved the problem differently than I may have based on their culture. Okay, so we're going to stop this here and see you in the next one.